Hi, I'm Rhiannon Enlil, an experienced team leader here at Sazerac House. Thank you so much for joining us today for a cocktail workshop based around the Sazerac cocktail, the official cocktail of the city of New Orleans. We're going to get started on making this drink together in about 5 minutes, which gives you an opportunity to make sure that you've got all your ingredients, your tools, everything needed in order to make this drink along with me. A little bit about myself. I moved to New Orleans about 20 years ago. I started bartending right away and fell immediately in love with bartending and cocktails, spirits history, the legends and lore surrounding French Quarter bars. And I did it for most of my adult life until I decided to go to school here in New Orleans, and I got myself a history degree where I focused on drinking history of New Orleans in the 20th century. So by landing a job at the Sazerac House, I pretty much got a dream job. It's combining my love of New Orleans as well as my love of New Orleans drinking culture and cocktail history, all in a fantastic home place for the Sazerac Company. So the Sazerac Company is the largest spirits company in North America, but it's still independently owned and operated here in New Orleans. And the Sazerac House, which opened in October of 2019, is located on the corner of Magazine and Canal Streets. And it's essentially our head offices. It's a micro distillery where we're making Sazerac rye whiskey in downtown New Orleans, as well as a beautiful event space, including some of the tasting rooms like the one I'm standing in now. But really, it's also 3 floors of a spirited experience, which is where it has my heart, because it's 3 floors of telling the history of New Orleans through its cocktails and through its fantastic products. So we're going to be focusing on one drink in particular, the official cocktail of New Orleans, the Sazerac cocktail. And that is so important to the city of New Orleans because of all of these fantastic ingredients. To make this drink along with me, you're going to need to make sure that you have some of them. So we've got Sazerac rye whiskey, herb saint, Peychaud's bitters. Make sure you have some sugar cubes and a whole lemon for garnish. Don't forget to get ice. I've got some in a bucket right here. Ice is super important, not only for chilling our glass, but mixing our drinks. Make sure you have some ice. As far as tools, you're going to need 2 rocks glasses. One is going to be to drink out of, and one is going to be to mix in. If you don't have 2 identical rocks glasses, that's fine. Make sure you have one to drink out of. We're going to put ice in that to chill, and then just a pint glass or a mixing glass to build our drink. You'll need to make sure you have a muddler. If you don't have a muddler, anything that has a bit of like a nickel size flat end in order to crush the sugar cube will suffice. You'll want to make sure that you have a long bar spoon. If you don't have a long bar spoon, grab yourself a chopstick or maybe even the upside down part of a soup handle, like a dowel. You'll need something to measure with. So I've got here kind of a classic cocktail jigger. It's 2 ounces on one side and 1 ounce on the other. But if you don't have that, that's fine. Grab yourself a tablespoon. Every tablespoon is ½ an ounce. It's a good rule of thumb if you're making drinks at parties and you don't have one of those fantastic cocktail tools lying around. Get yourself a swivel peeler or a Y peeler. Almost every kitchen has something like this. It's going to be important for when we use it to garnish our drink with a lemon twist. And of course, a cocktail strainer. I'm using a classic design. This is a julep strainer, but a lot of home bars don't have something that looks like this. You probably are more familiar with a Hawthorne strainer, which has like a coil on it. So if you have something that looks like this, that's a-okay, as long as it fits over the mouth of your mixing glass. It's there to hold back the ice. Let's see. I think we have everything as far as tools go. So if you're ready, if you've got your ice, you've got your tools, and the last thing I think is if you've got something to dump your ice in. I like to make my drinks kind of near a sink or in the kitchen. If you're not making it near a sink, make sure you've got like a cup or a bucket, something to dump the ice in. I think we might be ready to make a Sazerac cocktail together. So first step is you go ahead and take the glass that you're going to drink out of, one of our rocks glasses, and you're going to fill that up with ice to chill it. So once you've got, I don't know, a handful of cubes in there, you can just go ahead and set it aside. We're going to come back to that glass later. Next, you'll take the glass that you're mixing your drink in, and we're going to add a sugar cube. Now, I like these sort of very perfect square sugar cubes. It's a precise measurement of ½ a teaspoon of sugar. They don't go bad as long as you keep them in a kind of a nice, dry, cool place, safe place. And then to the sugar cube, we're going to put in 3 dashes of Peychaud's bitters. Now, when you open up your cap of Peychaud's, you'll notice there's another cap. That's actually the dasher cap, and it's there to help you. It's there to protect you from accidentally putting a huge splash of bitters into your drink when what you're really looking for is 3 dashes. But a dash is still a dash, not a couple of drops. So don't be shy. Go ahead and pour it in like 3 long movements, right? Get your elbow involved. But you're going to put 3 dashes on top of this sugar cube. 1, 2, 3. And now the fun part where we muddle the sugar cube with our muddler. So again, using the flat end of a muddler, about the size of a nickel, you're just going to press down on that sugar cube and grind it up into a paste. You're essentially going to be dissolving the sugar in the Peychaud's bitters. Now, like I mentioned, I like to use those sort of domino dots that are exactly half a teaspoon. And by pressing down with my muddler and stirring it around, I'm essentially sort of dissolving that entire cube before I even get to the next step. This will be important when we go ahead and add our whiskey, because it'll make sure that we don't have this sort of like granular texture when we're drinking the Sazerac later. So once you're satisfied that it's all ground up and almost totally dissolved, set your muddler aside, and we add Sazerac rye whiskey. It's about 1.5 ounces directly on top of that dissolved sugar cube with Peychaud's. And like I mentioned, if you don't have a cocktail jigger, 1/2 ounce or 1/2 ounce is 1 tablespoon. So 3 tablespoons if that's what you're using at home, no problem. So we've got in here our muddled sugar cube, or 3 dashes of Peychaud's bitters, 1.5 ounces of Sazerac rye whiskey. I'm going to add ice and stir. Now, ice is a bit of an unsung hero when it comes to cocktails because it does so many things. It's not just to keep your drink cold, which is the first thing that comes to my mind. We're going to stir this drink. And by stirring this drink, we are going to add water dilution to the Sazerac cocktail. And that is an incredibly important component of the drink itself. So go ahead and take your spoon or your chopstick or your swizzle stick and just go ahead and give it a nice long stir. We're adding water for the dilution, we're incorporating all of the ingredients, and we're chilling it down to the temperature that we want. But we're going to strain this drink off of the ice and put it into our chilled cocktail glass. So after a handful of seconds, everything is nicely incorporated. Set that to the side. I'm going to put my strainer right on top, get it ready. And now this glass that's been set aside to chill is nice and cold. So go ahead and dump out that ice. And we're going to add 1/4 ounce of herb saint. I'm going to eyeball it. Just a little bit of herb saint, and we're going to coat that glass. By coating the glass, you just kind of want to carefully get the liquid almost all the way to the lip of the glass without spilling. And try to make sure that you're holding that cold glass from the bottom so that your hands aren't warming up the glass and kind of negating all that fantastic work the ice just did. So you want a nice cold glass, completely coated in herb saint, but then dump out the excess. And now I can smell all that herb saint, and it's ready for this rye whiskey sugar Peychaud's mixture. Pour it on in. And the final touch, the lemon garnish. So you get that swivel peeler out and you kind of hold the lemon over the glass as you peel down, because all you really want out of that garnish is the exterior of that lemon. All the oils, the lemon oils that we want expressed, are trapped on the outside. You don't want any of that pith or any of the pulp or juice. And when you've got that lemon peel, you just pinch it and it's going to spray across the surface of the cocktail. You can already smell it. Now, if you coil up that lemon twist and rest it carefully on the side, you've made yourself a perfect Sazerac cocktail. This is a great opportunity to acknowledge how beautiful this drink is, how hard you worked for it, and hopefully you're snapping some pictures, maybe you're cheersing your friends, and I'm going to cheers to you for a perfect Sazerac cocktail. Now, I will say, I can be a little clumsy, And I don't know what's going to happen with this lemon twist every time I try to take a sip. So I am going to knock it right into that drink. That's my preference. A lot of people, especially in New Orleans, who've been drinking this drink forever, will say, well, let's take the whole lemon off of the drink entirely. It's up to you. It definitely requires those lemon oils, and we'll talk about that when we get to that part of the story. But if you're enjoying your perfectly made Sazerac cocktail, I'd love to give you a little bit of its backstory, because it's a drink that has such a long history and involves so many twists and turns and crazy characters that it's something I've always loved to share. So really, we have to start with that word, Sazerac. And what does that even mean? Like, I work at the Sazerac house. I already mentioned it's owned by the Sazerac company, but you're drinking a Sazerac cocktail. It's a lot going on. Well, when you go all the way back, Sazerac itself, that word, is actually a family name originally. It was a family that in the 1600s and 1700s in France started producing their own line of cognac. And cognac, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a distilled spirit made from grapes. Grapes is going to be important later. But cognac is made in France because it's a type of brandy and it's from a very specific region. And the Sazerac family, particularly a patriarch by the name of Bernard Sazerac, started a bit of a cognac empire and started exporting it all over. In fact, in the late 1700s, they started exporting it to New Orleans. Well, in the late 1800s, we were still very much tied to our French roots. We loved every sort of French and European import. And it was a mark of distinction if you were drinking this very nice cognac by the name of Sazerac, Sazerac de Forges cognac. And it was so popular, this brand was beloved, that a particular establishment decided to change its name to the Sazerac House. So back in the 1800s in New Orleans, and this is a little bit of, some grounding, we had bars and taverns and saloons. But if you wanted to go and have a sophisticated drink, a refined cocktail of sorts, you would go to a coffee house or, a place that was known for making fancy drinks. Because back then, coffee houses weren't just places to get coffee. They were also places for networking, checking your mail, conducting business, eating a free lunch if you would stay a little bit longer and have an extra fancy drink. And the word cocktail itself, this is important as well. The word cocktail actually had a specific definition. We know that word to mean any mixed drink. But if you were in a coffee house in New Orleans in the 1800s and you ordered a cocktail, you were basically giving that bartender a recipe. Because in the early 1800s, a cocktail was defined as a spirit of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters. That might feel a little familiar after what we just made together. So take a sip. Think about that for a moment. A cocktail was a very specific recipe. And just down the road from the Sazerac house, which was originally located on Royal Street and kind of between Royal and Exchange Place in the French Quarter, just down the road, there was a gentleman making bitters. He was running an apothecary. His name was Antoine Amédée Peychaud. This is our second main character of the story. Antoine Amédée Peychaud had immigrated with his family in the early 1800s, and by the 1830s, he was running his own little pharmacy, and he was making bitters, which are essentially all these different botanicals and herbs and spices and things that were put into high-proof alcohol and bottled up and sold as, maybe a cure-all or some kind of, remedy for various ailments. We know it now as an important ingredient in cocktails. And so Peychaud's bitters, just down the road from the famed Sazerac house, he starts advertising, you can get his bitters down the road in the Sazerac house. So if you're going into that establishment and you're asking the bartender for a brandy cocktail or a cognac cocktail, you better believe they're going to reach across that bar and they're going to get that Sazerac cognac, which is what their bar was named for. Sugar, water, and reaching over their shoulder and grabbing Peychaud's bitters, our neighbor just down the road. So Sazerac cognac, sugar, water, and bitters come together and becomes the sort of foundation of the drink that we're enjoying today. That foundation is super important in the 1800s as kind of becoming a branded drink, a branded cocktail, not only for the brand of Sazerac de Forge cognac, but also for the branded bar. So Sazerac House maybe had like the first house cocktail, the first specialty drink that people started asking for time and time again. But then something terrible happens in Europe in the late 1860s, 1870s, and it's called phylloxera. It was an agricultural disaster. So remember that I said that cognac and brandy that's made from grapes. That was important because in the 1870s and the 1880s, this little bug, phylloxera, decimates France's vineyards. If you can't grow grapes, you can't turn it into wine, you can't turn it into cognac, you can't sell Sazerac de Forge cognac anymore. And in the 1880, the last shipment of that famous brand of cognac was sent to New Orleans to the Sazerac House, and that was a wrap. So what do? You've got this branded cocktail inside essentially a branded bar, and these customers clamoring for this product. An entrepreneurial bartender running Sazerac House at the time, he had some connections in Maryland and started importing American rye whiskey from Maryland, which had kind of a similar flavor to that Sazerac de Forge cognac that was coming out of France at the time. We think of cognac nowadays as being sort of sweet and, definitely something you sort of sip neat. But back then, it had a lot more different grapes in there before that terrible little phylloxera bug wiped them out. So it was actually a very flavorful, robust, and complex product. And it made transitioning from cognac to whiskey kind of a natural fit. And so American rye whiskey gets introduced into this drink. And slowly but surely, as the dwindling supply of Sazerac de Forge cognac is falling out of, the storerooms of the Sazerac House, it becomes entirely a rye whiskey drink. Well, something else is happening in the late 1800s that is important in cocktail history. That is the experimenting and creativity of the original golden era of cocktails. So from about the mid-late 1800s through the early 1900s, bartenders were becoming revered craftsmen and very inventive and creative, almost notorious proprietors and inventors of different drinks and different sort of nuanced ways to deal with drinks. So if you think about that Sazerac cocktail as sort of kind of morphing and changing over, several decades into a rye whiskey cocktail, spirit of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters, that's the definition. Well, bartenders wanted to get a little more playful. And a couple of bartenders start throwing in different ingredients into these, beloved and remembered cocktails, and decided that they might need to improve them in some way or give them a twist or spin that's, maybe a little bit more localized. And in New Orleans, we loved our French imports and all of our European imports. And there we have the introduction of absinthe into this drink. A couple of bartenders started throwing in a dash of absinthe to maybe spruce it up a little bit. And that was super popular for about a decade or so, until absinthe was banned because it got a really bad rap in Europe in the early 1900s. And it was criminalized to produce absinthe as far back as 1912. And so unfortunately, it was a bit of the warning shot of prohibition. Only 8 years before actual prohibition in New Orleans, when we're not drinking anything at all, we weren't drinking absinthe. But a New Orleanian had spent some time in France, and he got a taste for absinthe, and he brought home a recipe. So that gentleman, another important character in our story, his name was Marion Lejeune. And he came back to New Orleans after spending some time in Europe during World War I, and he had with him this recipe for making absinthe. And as soon as Prohibition was repealed, he goes ahead and launches forth with his Lejeune absinthe. The government said, no, no, no. Even though we can drink again, hooray, Prohibition's been repealed, you still can't drink absinthe. The absinthe ban remained into effect until 2007. But he was able to pivot back in the 30s. He said, okay, I will change the name of my fantastic product to Herb Saint. And then, as a fantastic twist of marketing, every single time that he put out an advertisement, he was quick to remind the public that if you were going to make a drink that called for absinthe, make sure you use Herb Saint. And so this recipe that was a Sazerac cocktail, originally cognac, sugar, water, which comes from the ice dilution, and bitters, which is Peychaud's, turns into rye whiskey, sugar, water, which comes from the ice dilution, and Peychaud's with a dash of absinthe, becomes a dash of Herb Saint. And that becomes the next sort of chapter in that tale of the evolution of the drink. Now, that lemon garnish is super important as well, because that lemon oil that we talked about expressing across that surface, that becomes a popular style of garnishing some of these modernized or creatively modified drinks of the late 1800s. It kind of comes out, at least in New Orleans, from a wave of Italian and Sicilian immigrants that come to New Orleans, bringing with them their love of Sicilian lemons, and they're running all these produce markets in the French Quarter, which was, of course, where the Sazerac house was located. So you had access to all this fresh produce, probably using the juice for drinks or for cooking. But then what do you do with the peels? Inventive bartenders, again, start garnishing drinks with long swaths of lemon peel. That starts popping up in cocktail books as far back as the 1880s. So really, when you think about the drink that you're drinking, you have almost the entire history of New Orleans in this drink. If you raise it to your lips again, and let's just walk through a few things that I smell every time I get to a Sazerac. Can definitely get the lemon, but I can also get the Herb Saint. That Herb Saint is like that anise or licorice smell. Of course, you can smell a little bit of sweetness from the sugar, and definitely from the Peychaud's. There's a bunch of fantastic sort of licorice notes there too. But then it's very booze forward with that delicious rye whiskey. So it's kind of spicy sweet with lots of layers. Because you made this drink with me, you know, we put 1.5 ounces of rye whiskey in there, and all the other ingredients we're talking about are just a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But it comes together in one singular note. And I would like to state that when you think about those notes, you know, we started with a French cognac, that story, that idea, right? But it becomes an American whiskey. A little bit like New Orleans. We've got our influence of absinthe, which is actually kind of reinterpreted by a New Orleanian entrepreneur named Marion Legendre, and he says, let's use Herb Saint whenever absinthe is called for. Peychaud is that line that stays strong and steady. It's been Peychaud since the beginning, and it's still there now. Of course, the expression of a lemon peel on top. You start to see all these different influences spanning about, 150 years, right? We've got all the different bits of New Orleans history tied up in these different ingredients and all these different characters coming together to make the official cocktail of the city of New Orleans. In 2008, that's exactly what happened. We were the first city in America to have an official cocktail. We may have started a trend, and it could not be a better cocktail to represent the diversity of New Orleans, the lengthy history of New Orleans, and all the different influences that come together in a single glass. I hope you enjoyed making this drink and drinking it with me as much as I've loved talking to you about it. And thank you so much for joining. Cheers.